somebody from the party that's usually thought of as being more to the right than to the left. And he came forward with this image of being the populist representing the frustrated and the forgotten. And you know, in a way, I think Taiwan managed to take the three parts of Trump and break them into three different candidates, right? So Han Kuo-yu plays this kind of populist, forgotten man thing. Guo Taiming, Terry Go, was supposedly the businessman who could do politics because he could do business. And Ke Len-je, the mayor of Taipei, is this kind of out there character who also rejected traditional party politics, and they each had the three faces of Trump in some ways. But the two who made it to the final election, Han Kuo-yu has a lot of that quality. And I think on the DPP side, Shelley's absolutely right, and she knows Taiwanese domestic politics way better than I do. But there is a sense that some of what got the Tsai administration into trouble is a little reminiscent of the American Democratic Party. That is, they're supposed to be progressive, but the progressive wing of the party got rather frustrated with the way Tsai had governed in the first few years. Marriage equality was something that the sort of youth and liberal base part of the DPP constituency was very much for, and the Taiwanese Constitutional Court said you've got to go forward on this, but it took a while to get the law through, and it was kind of a semi-compromise, and they got hit on that. There was labor rule reforms, which was an attempt to sort of get better overtime pay and to get structured time off, but the way it worked out, there was some criticism from both the labor side and the business side. And if you look at pension reform, which needed to be done fiscally, that alienated a lot of mostly KMT-leaning former civil servants and military and such. So, this is part of, I think, what happens when you pursue an ambitious, relatively progressive agenda, and it gets blowback from some of your own base, and it's very tough to get all this stuff through at once. So in some ways, it's a little bit like what we've seen happen to the Democratic Party with its attempt to balance its progressive wing and its more moderate wing. So there are analogies here, but one doesn't want to push them too much. Taiwan has its own politics and has its own unique concerns, even when we're talking only about social and economic issues rather than the singular problem of cross straits.
Thanks, Sean. I might give a shout out to our managing editor, Tom Shattuck, who's in the audience tonight, who's just written an excellent piece that's on, little plug, FPRI website, on the changing nature of the KMT. And I think one of the interesting things about Taiwan is changing demographics in the country. Vincent, you're nodding. You want to say a word about that?
Sure. Just to follow up Shelley's basic point, I think I agree that both the KMT and the DPP are essentially centrist parties when it comes to socio-economic issues. And in fact, this can be attested by the fact that historically, sort of the leftist parties in Taiwan, like the Workers' Party or Labor Party, didn't do well at all. Having said that, these two major parties' ideologies or political bases have actually undergone some very important shifts over the years. Just look at another dimension. Sometimes as a shorthand, we will say that the KMT historically is a pro-unification party, and this is because the KMT's roots went back to being the ruling party of all China, and then came to Taiwan, and they still have when they were in power, they have the unification guideline and so on. So they pay lip service to a unification, but in fact they are pro-status quo, like the Ma Ying-jeou's policy and so on, until Xi Jinping's New Year's speech last year, which basically didn't give them any room for interpretation about the 1992 consensus, each side with its own interpretation. Now we are not sure what the KMT stands for, right? The DPP, on the other hand, historically is a pro-independence party, but they resolved this issue in 1999 with the resolution on Taiwan's future. They say that their country is already independent. Its name is Republic of China. In fact, President Tsai most recently in his interview with BBC said that there's no need to declare independence anymore. And this important but subtle change coincide with the demographic shift because historically the KMT draw more support from those from the mainland or people with a sort of a dual identity as both Chinese and the Taiwanese. But as these people are becoming fewer and fewer, and the young people whose entire existence is on Taiwan, And there's this phrase called 天然独, or natural green, meaning that they are more likely to identify as only Taiwanese. So the DPP benefits from this demographic broadening of the sort of the green base, and the KMT, on the other hand, is losing this demographic base. And whether this trend will continue, I think it's likely to continue in future elections, remains to be seen.
Thanks, Vincent.
Yeah, if I can jump in, you were asking about the sort of parallels between American and Taiwan political parties, and what struck me is that in both cases, in the U.S., the GOP is trying to figure out what its sort of basic ideological premises are, and I think the KMT is facing that to some extent too, for exactly the reasons that Vincent and Jacques talked about, is it's no longer viable to talk about being the pro-unification party. As you suggest, the demographics of pro-unification voters, it's a pretty tiny block you're going after. And so what does that mean if you have two largely economically centrist parties? You have the DPP that has staked out the sort of center, as long as the DPP continues to stake out that center on cross straits, that seems to be the more popular, which is clearly the more attractive issue. What does that mean for the KMT? I mean, a two-party system or a multi-party system only works if you can figure out how to have multiple political identities, and I think the KMT's got to figure that out.
Another issue, and it's something that